Have you heard of Jonas? Now, some of you already know where I'm going with this, but many of you have no idea. Jonas was this person, maybe it was not their real name, probably wasn't, discussed at a TEDx event at the University of Würzburg in Germany. A woman named Miriam Hein, I'm probably saying her name incorrectly because it's foreign to my native tongue, but she gave this TEDx talk saying that pedophilia was a natural human sexual orientation. Now, I'm safe to say that a vast majority of human beings in America are like, what? And not just America, but around the world. Excuse me? Pedophilia? No, that's sick. But she's not alone in this belief. The fact that it was a TEDx talk means it's moving more and more towards the mainstream. This idea of the normalization of intergenerational sex. According to this woman, Jonas is a man who has this sexual attraction to girls between the ages of 6 and 12, to the point he can't go to the beach anymore to enjoy himself because of the young girls in their swimsuits. The sad part about it is that I'm not even surprised. Look here in Australia, where MP George Christensen had questioned why Gary Dowsett should be allowed to head the Safe Schools and Anti-Bullying program in Australia, when he wrote an article called Boiled Lollies and Band-Aids, Gay Men and Kids. And in this piece, he said, how different then is the gentle, tentative sexuality between parent and child from the love of a pedophile and his or her lover. That kind of love, warmth, and nurture is an important part of the pedophilic relationship. Now, one would say, oh, well, what was the context? What was said around it? It doesn't even matter, because here are some more shocking comments that he said. He argued in that journal piece that pedophilia should be part of the larger gay movement. It must be legally recognized as part of the wider sexual liberation movement. He said that we must fight for the rights of adults and their young lovers. We must fight for the sexual rights of children. This is just bizarre. And in Australia, many people supported this man. It's extremely disgusting that we are now being expected to have sympathy for adults who like to have sex with children because they're born this way. Sadly, the American Psychiatric Association, in their new DSM in 2013, came out and said that not all pedophiles have a mental disorder. It's just because a human may have unusual sexual interests that doesn't necessarily classify as a mental disorder. The day after that, the American Psychological Association came out with their own statement distancing themselves from the American Psychiatric Association, saying that pedophilia is a mental disorder. I could understand why they would want to distance themselves from such freakery. Are we really surprised that we have arrived at this point? In our society, we have images of young children dancing at gay pride parades. A young boy who is just 12 years old in booty shorts gyrating in very sexual manner for groups of adults. One news source even said that you're homophobic if you see something wrong with this. What does a person being homosexual have to do with pedophiles? Now, children are being taught that it's okay to change gender, that we should totally ignore sexual norms because it's a new world we live in, right? In Quebec, children in the kindergarten are being taught about alternative sexual lifestyles. Even in America, you have the same issue of Planned Parenthood creating sex ed for kids, teaching kids about BDSM and rimming. That's disgusting. Why do kids need to learn this? But are we really surprised that we've arrived to this point in our country? Because we shouldn't be. With the boy gyrating at the parade, where kids being dragged to the Huffington Post saying the future is queer. Why are we surprised at these things happening in our country? Because we have allowed it to happen. And look here, the UK Daily Mail reporting about a man who apparently claims to have had a sexual relationship with a dolphin is giving a movie review about The Shape of Water. He's even wondering why humans seem to accept interspecies sexual relationships in fantasy films, but not in real life. How sick is this? Where they're now publishing articles saying maybe women should think outside of human males for sexual pleasure because men don't always treat us right. Normalizing this interspecies sex that we call bestiality. Why are we surprised? Look here. At the University of California, Santa Cruz, an art professor and the chair of the art department and her lover and the family dog have decided to go out into nature with the blessing of the university and tax dollars to create pornographic material with the different plants and vegetation and trees within nature. They have the theory of, if you want to heal the environment, have sex with it. How bizarre is this? And let's not forget Teen Vogue also chiming in on the ecosexual talk, teaching teens how to queer it up with the environment. And what is an ecosexual? Let's not forget about Teen Vogue's infamous anal sex article, where they were teaching teens how to safely engage in anal sex with prostate and non-prostate having persons. This is just demonic. We shouldn't be surprised because we've all been complicit in it. We've been complicit in it since the 1960s when we began to normalize premarital sex. We have invited Satan into our nation with open arms because it gave us the room to engage in whatever sexual sin that we wanted to. As long as I'm not engaging in that guy's sexual sin, this is okay. We kick God out of society in order to chase our erotic desires. And that has had so many unintended consequences in our life and in our society that we can't even begin to imagine. So many people who claim to be Christians have no idea of the spiritual ramifications that sexual sin brings into your life and that of a nation. The Apostle Paul tells us in Ephesians 6:12 that we don't wrestle against flesh and blood, right? We know this. We're not wrestling against human, as the Apostle Paul tells us. We're wrestling against demonic powers. Now, of course, he says more than that, but that is the essence of what he's saying. We're wrestling against the spiritual realm, and that is very true. But it's important for you to look at the verses before and after Ephesians 12 to get the whole picture of what Paul is telling us. Because if you look at Ephesians 10 and 11, he's telling us we need to grow in close union with the Lord. In 10 and 11, he's telling us for us to be able to stand up against the deceptive tactics of the enemy, of the adversary. Notice Paul talking about those deceptive tactics. See, a lot of people think they can invite Satan into their life in this one little space. I can have Satan in this one little area of my life and nowhere else, right? And think he's just going to stay there. As my mother says, Satan is no gentleman. He gets into every area of your life, and that has what happened in our society. We made it okay for couples to engage in premarital sex, and naturally what comes that is abortion. Because children in these situations are not typically wanted many times, so now we have to kill the children. And then when we start to say, oh, well, if you want to have sex with somebody of the same sex, that's okay too. And now it has morphed into something worse. It used to be a time when it was like, let me live my life and leave me alone. Now, many of us became empathetic to that cause. Not that we necessarily agreed with people's sexual lifestyles, but we said, I mean, it's not my life. I don't necessarily agree with you, but this is your life, and I'm gonna leave you alone. But it's not about that. It's morphed into something so much darker than that. Then even people who identify as one of those letters sometimes don't even see it themselves. It is morphed into something that either you agree with me or you're an evil, hateful bigot and a homophobe, and I'm going to ruin your life. But we have stepped aside as society, and it started back when we made it okay to engage in premarital sex. Oftentimes we think, as I mentioned earlier, that as long as I'm not engaging in that guy's sexual sin, then I am okay, but you're not okay. Many people who are heterosexual engage in swinger lifestyles and threesomes and orgies and open relationships and say, oh, well, I'm just going to keep it in this little area of my life. No, sweetie, you invited Satan into all of your life. It's okay if it's normal to have premarital sex. It's normal to live with your boyfriend for a few years to see if it's going to work out, right? No. Because, again, when you kick God out, nature hates vacuums, Satan fills right in. And that is what has happened in our society. Our abandonment of God in order to appease our own personal sexual desires. And when, as a nation, things began to spiral out of control, we ask, why? After Ephesians 6:12 and 13, the Apostle Paul begins to tell us that we are to use every weapon. We use every piece of armor that God has gives us. And the first piece of that armor is faith. And faith is exercised through our obedience. This is a spiritual fight we are in, people. This war, when we see this pedophilia being normalized, and we see bestiality being normalized, and we see us being told that it's gender is a social construct and that children should be allowed to have puberty blockers, and the Huffington Post saying the future is queer, and we're teaching our children that it's not okay for you to just think that you could be with a man or a woman, or it's not okay for you to think that maybe people should be with the opposite sex because you're a hateful, evil bigot if you don't. See, that is the end. The beginning started when we decided to kick God out. We decided to fight with God. I think about the book of Acts. I may be getting confused. It might be chapter 5. I can't remember 12 off the top of my head. I'm sorry. But when Peter and some of his crew, if you will, had been arrested, and they wind up escaping from prison. And so the Sanhedrin went to go get them again. And when the Sanhedrin went to go get Peter and his friends again, Peter and his friends went without a fight. And the soldiers knew that if they tried to force Peter and the crew to go, they would get stoned by the crowd. But when Peter and his friends went before the Sanhedrin, they said, in so many words, we don't answer to you. We answer to God. We don't answer to men. We answer to God. And one of the members of the Sanhedrin asked them to leave. And then after he asked them to leave, he spoke to the other men, and he began to list and mention these different instances where people had leaders that they followed, the leaders died, and the movement fizzled out. But this messianic movement, this movement for Yeshua, was very different. The member began to notice how if this is a human or an origin, it will fizzle out. But this may be from God. And he concluded that we don't want to fight God. Are you fighting God, or are you fighting for God?